Hi everyone, thank you for watching me here on I See Melanie, and today we're going to be talking about the season 2 premiere of The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon, The Book of Carol. So Carol is now on the show full time. It's going to be quite an interesting ride. So in this video today, I'll start off by talking about Daryl's storyline, and the bulk of it will be about Carol's storyline, and some of my overall thoughts on the episode. I'm going to try to pronounce the name of the episode using my grade 11 French. La gentillesse des étrangers. La gentillesse des étrangers. Okay, that's good enough. The opening scene starts off and it appears as though we're picking up literally right where we left off last season, but no, it's actually been about 2 weeks. Daryl is still there. He is training Laurent on how to defend himself. And Laurent's fumbling a little bit, but Daryl reassures him it's just been a couple of weeks. You'll get better with time. And Laurent, I should say, I know a lot of people find him annoying. And I typically do not like children on The Walking Dead or children in shows that are geared towards adults. But there's just something so sweet about Laurent. He's just like a sweet boy who's been coddled all his life. So he gets a pass for some reason for me. Anyway, when they go back to Mont Saint-Michel and Daryl talks to Lo Sang and he tells him he doesn't want Laurent to be training in self-defense because he wants him to be a pacifist. And Daryl says, well, he needs to defend himself. Like he needs to keep alive in this world. And Lo Sang says, you know what? He has a greater purpose. You know, if he dies, he dies. So it's kind of weird. Like I'm not typically a fan of these type of religious figures. Like they're treating Laurent as though he is some kind of a deity. He's just a 13-year-old boy. They're putting all this pressure on him. And if he needs to be a martyr, if he has to die at some point, according to Lo Sang, he served his purpose. And I don't really care about that, but you know, that's not for me. That's for his aunt and everyone to decide what they're going to do with that. Anyway, later on, we learned that Falou and Emile have been captured by Madame Genet's people. And of course, we want them back. We want them back safely. And Daryl is going with the very Daryl approach to go after them, to kill them because Madame Genet and her people are menaces. But Lo Sang, he's more of a pacifist. He wants to subdue them. If he has to come and attack them, he will, but that's not going to be his first line of defense. And so later on, we see that he's very Morgan-esque. He's got his, that stick. What is that stick called again? The stick, I think it's called Nikito stick. And he is fighting in a very defensive way, right? He doesn't want to throw the first punch. He wants to throw the last punch. But Daryl has a good eye, a good sense of what these people are like. And so anyway, when they come to do the trade, the team just wants to pacify them. They want to ruin their tires to stop them. But no, Daryl gets his gun. He starts shooting. He gets a lot of them. But we see Madame Genet is still alive. And she very menacingly, kind of caricaturishly, is taunting him. And when Daryl's kind of fumbling to get the rifle together to shoot her, an explosion goes off. She disappears into the wind. Where is she? Who knows? Daryl could have killed her, but you know, for plot reasons, they're not going to kill her off in the first episode. And so that's basically what happened in the Daryl section. Not really too much. Most of it was on Carol. So the Carol scene, we saw this in the sneak peek at San Diego Comic-Con. And so we see that she goes to the shop. She figures out that Daryl has been here. She gets the upper hand on all these men. And in that video I did a couple of months ago, I mentioned that sometimes I feel that this show, The Walking Dead, kind of makes Carol out to be like almost like a superhero, which is fun at some points, but it kind of gets overused. But again, I should say actually overall in this show, I knew I had to suspend a lot of disbelief just for the fact that they're over there in France, and we know that Carol goes over there by plane. So some of these things I'm just going to let fly because I just kind of have to if I'm going to enjoy this show. So eventually when she figures out, okay, he went that way when he went to the boat to go to France. And when she's driving down the street, she is fumbling with the tapes and then she looks up and she sees the plane. So obviously in that world, if you see a plane, it's going to, you know, distract you a little bit. You want to see what's going on. But I thought this. presuming, and this is a big assumption, presuming that the person that she said came back is Rick. And we don't know exactly the timeline, but there's a good chance, she was talking about Rick. I would think that she would be used to at least hearing helicopter noises, aircraft of some sort. Planes, maybe not so much, so I understand her looking up to see what's going on. But one thing I will never understand in real life, and especially in the apocalypse, is when people are driving and they're not fully trained on the road ahead of them. Like you see in TV shows or people, when they're having a conversation with their passenger, they look over to make eye contact. Like when I drive, I don't make eye contact with people. I gotta see what's on the road, especially in the zombie apocalypse. You don't know if a zombie is gonna come out. And lo and behold, a single zombie comes out. And this really throws Carol off kilter, which I found to be kind of strange considering it was one zombie, one walker. And we know how strong Carol is at driving and navigating throughout this world. And I understand that these things happen. The best people make mistakes all the time. But it just seemed really contrived. Like I felt like she was Lori, and she is not Lori. And so this sends her off. The car it looks totaled to me. It looks totaled in this world. It looks like it'd be totaled in the apocalypse world. But then she kind of deciphers where this plane is coming from. So she treks over to Ash's place and she's able to infiltrate it, and we meet Ash. Now, Ash, I have to say, is probably one of the most unrealistic characters I have seen in this entire franchise. For somebody who, I wouldn't call him a recluse, but for somebody who lives on their own, who has such an elaborate setup, this whole grounds, it was all the house, got a greenhouse, you got a barn, you've got a plane, you've got all these generators, you've got these electric fences and electric gates and everything. Like somebody who is very, I would think suited for this world and very smart. And so he sees Carol, and Carol she's one person. She's a very unassuming looking lady, and she puts on that demeanor. We know she doesn't have anybody with her, so he lets her stay over. And when he let her stay at her barn, in the barn, I thought to myself, first off, you've got this big grounds, this big house. Why would you let her stay off in your, another house on the property? And this barn, it was a barn technically, but this was like an office. It had gadgets, it had tools, it had the plane right there. It had so many valuable things. And to think to let this stranger into your place and have free reign over all these things that are very coveted that she might, want to steal, I thought was very odd. He could have sequestered her in a room in that big house that he had, but whatever. Again, I'm suspending all sorts of disbelief at this point. The next morning, they talk a little bit, so she learns that he flies every single day, which I also thought was very far-fetched. In this world now, and especially in the apocalypse, how does he fuel it? And he probably doesn't mean like literally 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, maybe 5 days, maybe 4 days a week. But still, how are you fueling that? And does he just go on joyrides, or does he go places and land, scavenge, and come back? How do you know where you're going to have the opportunity to land? All these logistics, again, I'm putting those out of my mind, but those are the questions that I did have. And then when she tells him that she wrecked her car, and she asks if he can help fix it. And she says, I parked it over there by the drive-in. I thought to myself, Ash seems like a guy who would probably have a spare car or would be able to fix up any car. Like, why does she need to have that car back? And for him to say, okay, I'll look around, I'll fly around to look to see where cars are so I can fix your car. I thought that was so weird. It's like, you're gonna, first, how, I'm sure he can, when he's flying, he can see their cars there. But again, how can you go down to the area where the cars are at? Like if he had a helicopter, I could understand that. But how is he going to do that? Why is he going to do that for her? Why is he going to do that for that particular car? And if he goes, I think it's like an SCS, like a Cadillac. He goes and he sees it. That car is pretty damaged. Like, why would he fix? Again, all these questions I'm going to just let go. It doesn't even come to that anyway, so it's moot. the day when I think it's at that same time where he goes off and he leaves her in his property, like the stranger who you've known for 24 hours, you're gonna leave her in your property. Made no sense. And then anyway, so the generator something trips or whatever, and so one of the doors opens. So not only does the lock unlock because it's no longer being electrically controlled, it opens. I thought that was really far-fetched. A man like him who has this big elaborate setup doesn't have some kind of physical barrier, a padlock, zip ties, anything to keep the door physically intact. Okay, so whatever. So then the walkers come in and Carol is in the greenhouse looking at the shrine he has for the sun, which he didn't know about before. And then they come in, they ruin the place. He's upset. And yeah, I understand why he's upset. And like, to be fair to Carol, I don't really think it's her fault per se, because these walkers were going to get in the grounds anyway. They just happened to get in the grounds and the greenhouse. And so then he explains to her, this is my son, I think later on that night after she cleans out the place and apologizes. And he explains that he had a son, the son died, he's grieving, and he likes to fly the plane because the kid liked planes and stuff like that. So we see they have this in common. They both lost a child, but of course, Carol is not being honest. She says that her daughter was in France when the world turned, and who knows if she's still there now. So, jumping back a little bit for me. Again, I love Carol, and I love Daryl, and I love them together. In The Walking Dead altogether, my favorite characters in this order are Rick, Michonne, Daryl, and Carol. If Rick is a 10, let's say, Michonne is a 9.99999. Daryl is a 9. Carol, for me, has been in between a 9, but she has dipped all the way down to a 4. Because she has done some things, especially in the latter half, or from season 6 onward, that have really, really bothered me. And for me, I like to look at my characters in a couple of different ways. I like to see that they're multifaceted, so that they're good, they're bad, they're flawed, they're complicated, they progress, they regress, they react to things. I love to see that. So I love imperfect characters. I think imperfect characters are the best characters. So I look at characters like that, but I also look at characters from the perspective of, if I was in that environment, if I was part of Team Family and Carol was, amongst me, would I want to be friends with her? Would I want her to be around me? And the answer is yes and no, because obviously she's very capable. She's cunning, which has worked in her and the team's favor. She can make food from acorns. Like, she's very talented for obvious reasons. But she also, in some ways, I think, has some sociopathic tendencies. She does things without thinking about other people, without empathy. And in particular in season 10, where she was grieving and she wasn't paying attention to the needs of the group when they were in that cave looking for Alpha. Then she goes in, and then Connie and Magna get stuck in there. And Daryl, I think Daryl would have been upset if anyone was stuck in the cave because of Carol's nonsense. But of course, Connie in particular, that was his little crush. He was very, very mad. And I would have been mad at her too. And that was something that almost ruined their friendship. Right? So I don't like when Carol does stuff like that. And with this situation, I thought it was so galling of her to come into this guy's house, this guy who was freakishly generous to her. Come in, lie about everything, lie about her daughter being in France because she wants him to risk his life to fly his plane across the pond, something he's never done, something very risky, to help her find her 50-year-old bestie. Lying like that, knowing that this guy lost a child and would do seemingly anything to help somebody else find their child, I think that is reprehensible, absolutely unforgivable. I have the feeling that soon after they arrive in Europe, Ash will be dead within the episode. I don't think Ash is long for the world because, that's how things kind of go on The Walking Dead. And this is what I think. I think if Daryl were to find out that she manipulated this guy by conjuring Sophia to get to him, I think Daryl would be fundamentally incensed and very mad and disappointed in Carol. For one, we know Sophia meant a lot to Daryl in terms of finding her, even though he didn't really know her at the time, but that was his mission, and he was very supportive of Carol during that time. He really put himself out there. So there's one thing. And also to find this other guy who he doesn't know, but to play on this guy's emotions, to do something so risky for her under a false pretense. I personally think that if Daryl were to find out, that would be the end of their friendship. Because we saw how mad he was in season 10 because of that whole reckless cave situation. I think that this would just push Daryl over the edge. But I don't really think that's going to be a problem because I think Ash is going to be dead, and very likely Carol's not going to tell him all that stuff anyway. Going back to Ash, though, it's like, you can't be this naive. If this lady's daughter was in France in 2010, and now I think it might be 2022 in their timeline, 2023, 10 plus years later, to go to this Parisian address to see if maybe she's around, that makes no sense. When you think about Carol came from Georgia. She went to Virginia. She went to Ohio. Now she's in Maine, I think they're in. And she traveled all that way in the space of 12 years. In Europe, people travel in Europe a lot now already as it is. You think that she's actually still going to be in France? Like, that to me, I thought was a silly thing for this guy to risk it all to do this for this lady. But anyway, we get to the point where Ash and Carol are about to take off to head to Europe. We'll head to Greenland and then to Europe. And I thought to myself, okay, I can really tell that this episode was directed by Greg Nicotero because, well, for one, he usually directs premieres and finales, but also we know he's very much into the special effects, the zombie effects, and the theatrics of it all. And it was so over the top. I didn't mind. It was fun. And for me, even though I love The Walking Dead, I've been watching it faithfully for me since 2012. I'm not really into zombies, but I do notice when they're done to the nth degree. And so all the zombies coming in from the shadows or from the field with all the lights behind them, and it's raining, it's thunder and lightning, it's terrible conditions to take off. It was really a lot. But that point where the generator or something bursts into flames, I watched this episode twice. Each time I completely jumped out of my seat. So it was very effective in terms of a jump scare for me. And anyway, so then, yeah, when she's about to get into the plane and there's a walker coming after her and she pushes it out to the propeller and the propeller chops up in 1,000 pieces. I thought, okay, that's kind of cool from an effects perspective. But in terms of a plane, you don't want to have guts in your propeller. I think it was like one propeller too. Maybe there are a couple of them, but still. I remember years ago, my parents, they ran over some roadkill. And my mom had to pull out pieces of deer from the bottom of the car. And this is a car in North America in a non-ZA. These people are flying to Europe in this tiny plane in the middle of the night in not great conditions. They didn't have time to look it over because they had to bust out of there. And there's blood and guts and not a good idea. But again, this is me suspending my disbelief. This is a TV show. This is dramatic. This is fun. And we see them reach over the horizon and they're on their way east to Europe. In this episode, we see a fair amount of callbacks, and there are two that stick out in my mind right away. One I liked, one I thought was like, okay, you're pushing it now. So when Ash leads Carol to the barn door to her sleeping chambers for the night, of course, a barn door would be very evocative for Carol. It's very evocative for all of us Walking Dead watchers because we know the situation with Sophia. So I like that. And I like the fact that, again, the story is leaning into previous stories because these characters have so much history. And so that was kind of cool to see the remake that they did of the barn scene. One that I thought was pushing it a touch was the Cherokee Rose. So I recently rewatched a few of these older episodes. And so I knew the flower, I forgot the name. And I remember, the name of the episode is Cherokee Rose. It's a Cherokee Rose. The likelihood of this guy having a single Cherokee Rose on his dining room table right there. as he's about to talk about the son who he lost, and she's about to talk about the son the daughter that she lost. She lies about it, but I thought that was a little too much. And again, I hope they go back to throwbacks, but let's keep it to a minimum because it was just way too on the nose for me. About the plane being able to fly from Maine, I think they're in, or the New England, to Europe, stopping over in Greenland. Google search, or he went on ChatGPT or something, and they said that, yeah, a small plane like that could fly to Europe, but would have to make stops. And Ash at some point mentioned, stopping in Greenland. And so at first I thought, well, you stop in Greenland, like, what are you going to do in Greenland? Like, how do you know you're going to have fuel in there? But they did mention that they keep the fuel in the plane. And yeah, so you could do that, just stop somewhere, refuel, and then take off again. And so, again, I'm willing to suspend that disbelief. Because if it could happen, it could happen. And once again, I knew this was happening since the summertime, so I had time to let that, marinate in my brain. And so as far as this episode goes, I would say it was very much a table-setting episode, particularly for Carol. And again, a lot of unrealistic stuff, but fine, we need to literally get there. It wasn't the strongest premiere. I don't think so. I very much appreciated the first premiere much more. I thought it was much stronger. But again, it's set up. Next week, I think we'll go into the story a bit more full tilt and get to some more substantive type of stuff. So I'm very much looking forward to it. Again, Carol is a character who I appreciate in ways. I always appreciate her as a character to watch on TV. I don't really like what she does personally, but that's fine. And Daryl I like, and Laurent I like, and everybody. So yeah, so I would love to know what you all think about it. Please leave a comment so we can start a discussion, and I will be back next week with a recap of episode 2 of The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon, The Book of Carol. Okay, thank you everyone for watching. I see Melanie, and I'll see you next time.